Hi, and welcome to Your Voice Dorset podcast. Today in the studio, I'm joined by Vikki Slade, the MP for Mid Dorset and North Poole. She's been the MP for the area since 2024. Before that, you've been involved in politics since 2011, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, I was first elected in 2011 for Broadstone Ward on Poole Council, and then for BCP Council, and then I became leader of BCP Council, which I did twice. And I'm still a councillor until there is, another election to replace me on that council.
Excellent. And how are you finding that transition from BCP politics, Dorset politics to Westminster? Because we're coming up to your first year of being MP.
I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? It's been a mad year. To go from being a leader of a council, you have huge amounts of sort of perceived power as a council leader. You have a lot of control over how things happen, but what you don't have is control about how much money comes in. So you can decide how to spend the money you've got, but you are governed by the rules set by Parliament. And it was great to be able to be at the other end of the system where you're trying to, influence the top end. Some people have said that it must be a really easy transition, and I'm not sure that it's that comparable. I mean, obviously I understand about how democracy works. I understand how to read a paper. I understand about voting. But the way government papers are written is very, very different to the way council papers are written. It's much more legal. And the way that we scrutinise is very, very different. So, yes, there are some advantages, but it is a very different job.
I can imagine. When did you get into politics? Did you come straight out of university and want to be a politician, or?
I've not been to university, Luke.
Fair enough.
And that's one of the reasons I'm doing this is, I got involved in politics because I'm not the sort of person that gets involved in politics. So I was asked by Annette Brooke, who was an MP at the time. She saw me get involved with local issues in the council and said, you should stand for Parliament. And I was like, people like me don't stand for Parliament, Annette. I'm a mum of 4. I had a cafe. The closest I got to politics was voting. I don't come from a political family. No one in my family had been to university before. And I thought that's not the sort of thing people like me do. And she said, well, that's why I think you would be perfect, because you're just like everyone else. And so I'm the sort of person, if you say, why don't you do something because it's not normal, I'll be like, fine, I'll give it a go. So I did. I didn't expect it to take me 12 years to be successful. But then on the other hand, I probably never really expected I would actually get to do it.
Sure.
Sure,
because it must be such it feels like a lofty ambition, something.
It's huge. I mean, when I stood the first time and didn't win, it was devastating.
That was in 2015.
2015. And when I say devastating, it's not exaggerating to say that it was the second worst thing to ever happen to me at that point after the loss of my mum. It literally felt like my life was just in pieces because everyone had assumed I would win, and my whole life had gone down that road. We'd sold our business. I didn't have a job. My husband didn't have a job. And then suddenly everything we thought was going to happen didn't happen. So when I then stood in subsequent elections, I never could face the idea of what if, because I had to protect myself. So this time I was pretty much the same. It's like, well, I haven't won last time, probably won't win this time. Give it one last go. And maybe that attitude helped.
Absolutely. No, it's great. And you've done a lot so far already, it feels like. You've spoken in Parliament several times and you're raising really important issues.
I think I'm amongst the top third of speakers in Parliament.
Incredible.
I think I'm somewhere like 140 times I've spoken. I mean, as we record this in this week, I've only been in Parliament for 2 days because it's been a short week in Parliament, and I've spoken 7 times.
Wow.
And my goal is to try to speak 3 to 5 times a week. So to do 7 was pretty good. It depends what issues come up. You know, I mean, I've had some success with the Wareham Railway crossing, which after 12 years of different people trying to resolve it, we got a positive resolution. I've had some good results on flooding in Litchett. I've been trying to do some work with hospices. And now I've, recently been raising the issue of wildfires, which has been a major issue in Dorset, and starting a bit of a campaign around seeing if we can get disposable barbecues banned and our fire services better funded.
That's great. Yeah, for listeners, there's been 2 major heath fires in recent weeks at the time of the recording. Do we know that they were caused by barbecues or?
No, they weren't caused by barbecues because they happened late at night. We know they were caused by humans.
Right.
We know they weren't natural. But we do know that the Wareham Forest massive fire that happened in 2020 was caused by disposable barbecue or camping. We know that 1,000 accidental fires a year are caused by disposable barbecues. And Dorset Council has been consulting on a PSPO, a public space protection order, banning them because they are such a problem around wildfires. We know that a lot of these fires, we call them wildfires as if they're wild, but most of them are human caused. They are a combination of accidental, so whether it be a barbecue, campfire, cigarette, or deliberate. But regardless of that, the last thing we need is something that is a throwaway item when there are other alternatives available. When I was leader of BCP, we banned them on our beaches because they caused such problems with people burning their feet. People would bury them in the sand to cool them down and then leave them there. and you'd get children who'd scald the base of their feet.
Awful.
That could be horrific. So for me, it's a very simple thing to do. The government did look at it a few years ago, and the research I've done suggests that there was a petition, got about 27,000 people that signed it back in 2020. The government did some work on it in 2022, but it seems to have disappeared since then. So that's why I've started a new campaign to see, how much interest there is in getting them banned, and then taking that to government and see whether government can look at a ban, if not restrictions on them.
And how do you go about doing that? Is this an online petition you've set up, or
so I've set up an online petition, but there's what you learn very quickly when you become an MP is all the other things you can do. So I've raised it in Parliament in a speech. There'll be a series of written parliamentary questions that I'll put down to try and understand where the government is at the moment. I could potentially put forward a motion to Parliament. So there's different ways of doing that. I could call a debate. So what I'm looking at is what's the most likely way to influence the government. And presenting a petition that we've done locally is the most obvious way of saying, I've managed to get X number of thousands of petitions, signatures. Of course, it may be relevant for us here in Dorset, but all over the country, people are suffering wildfires. We've had them in Cornwall, we've had them in Scotland, we've had them on the Isle of Wight already this year. People in those places would be just as interested in signing the petition.
Absolutely.
So if it's taken up by people who are in the government who agree with us, we've got more chance of getting it actioned.
How's that transition for focusing on maybe sort of Dorset issues to these more national issues? How do you find that kind of balance?
There are some issues that are very local, very specific. So I mentioned the Wareham railway crossing. And for me, those are the ones I've got to put more energy into. There are national issues. So we're about to be recalled because of a problem with British Steel. So we're all being called to go back to London to vote on a Saturday, which is very unusual. Well, that's got no local interest, but it will do if we've got a shortage of steel, or if if the country has to nationalise something, and that money that we could otherwise spend on the NHS has to be spent propping up an industry. So there's more crossover than people realise. And sometimes we get hyper-focused on one or the other. So it is about trying to localise a national problem. So when the government brought in an increase in employers' national insurance contributions, that affects businesses all over the country. My job is to tell the story of a local business. So I was talking about Julia's House Children's Hospice. I was talking about Tops Day Nursery. so that because people will then understand, oh, I get it. I get if the prices go up or if problems occur, they can make sense of it.
That's great. Let's go back to the topic you talked about, Wareham rail crossing. Like
Yeah.
I've got family in Wareham, so I was quite aware of it and how important that crossing was for people to get to town and be connected to the community.
Yeah.
Why did it take so long for it to come to a conclusion, really?
So basically, it's just to sort of give you the potted history. In the 1970s, where that railway crossing is, that was the main road into Wareham. They then built the bypass, and the council basically gave up the right for that to be a road. And when they did that, they mistakenly also gave up the right to cross it as a pedestrian. It'd been there for 150 years. You know, the road had been there for hundreds of years. The railway had been there for 100 years. When they did that, they didn't get the right of way retained for people. When they realised what they'd done, and it was a mistake back in the 70s, they then had to get a sort of lease arrangement with Network Rail to allow people to still use it as a crossing, which they did for 30 years. Then about 15 years ago, after there had been some near misses, Network Rail said, this is too dangerous. We need to close this crossing. Local people upcry, quite rightly, because it cuts the town in half. And so they had to put these other measures in place with these high fences. And ever since then, Network Rail have been saying it cannot carry on. We need to close the crossing and wanted to put a bridge in. Local people didn't want a bridge. They want to keep what they've got. And year after year, Network Rail stayed in their position of we want to close it. And the people were stuck in theirs. And what I managed to do, and the reason it took so long, is local people were adamant they wanted electronic gates. Network Rail were clear, electronic gates were never going to work because they're fundamentally less safe than what's there now. And when I got to the nub of the problem is, well, could you not just leave it as it is? And up until now, no one had ever said, can we not just leave it like it is? Now, the current arrangement costs the council money.
Right.
Because they have to have staff there. But the council have said, well, we're happy to keep paying. So suddenly you get to this point where you've sort of banged heads together and gone, actually, you're fighting about a problem that doesn't need to be fought about. And I think that sometimes it is just me being new, able to come in from a different angle and go, so what actually is the problem? And I think that sometimes we get stuck in a corner in our position. Somebody fresh coming in is able to just ask the sort of obvious question.
Sure.
It's like when you get someone new that comes into work, isn't it? And they go, why do you do it that way? And you're like, why do we do it that way? And sometimes you just think, gosh, why didn't we think of that? And that's what we've done here. Now,
Great.
It's not perfect by any stretch. You know, the council have still got to pay. And if they stopped paying, the problem would come back. But why would the council stop paying? I mean, they don't stop paying for traffic lights or other. It's now seen as just a fundamental part of what the council has to fund.
That's great. And you worked with Nick Ireland on that, didn't you?
Yeah, and it was Nick's clarity in saying, this is just business as usual. So he's confident. Network Rail are happy with him. So yeah, we've sort of, let's say, banged their heads together. They're now writing out that long-term agreement rather than having the sword of Damocles hanging over that, well, Network Rail want to close it. Network Rail are now content that the current arrangements work.
That's great. That's good news, especially with people wear them. Another big topic, a big issue in your constituency concerns the Camford Heath incinerator. And you even put a question to the Prime Minister about that recently.
My first ever Prime Minister's question.
And has he responded to it since? Has they followed up yet?
It was quite funny because quite rightly he didn't know the case. I got some fairly positive stuff back from the government. What I got back was the minister who told me that we're moving from what they call a linear economy to a circular economy, where they're basically saying we can't just keep using stuff and then getting more stuff. So it's about moving energy and goods, reusing stuff. What we haven't got is any sort of clarity from the government about whether we need more of these incinerators.
Right.
What they've left me with is more questions to ask.
Oh no.
So my whole position was, in the southwest of England, we already have 95% of the waste that we generate, we have means to get rid of through either landfill or incineration. If over the years we're going to start using less stuff because more of it is recyclable, and we actually use our resources better, then we shouldn't keep on building capacity, assuming we're going to use more waste.
Mm.
And they agreed with me and said, you're right, that's exactly what we shouldn't be doing. So now my next question is, but I just explained to you that we do have enough capacity. So what commitment can you give me? So I've got to keep inching away. And this is part of the parliamentary process, is you sort of funnel things down where you ask a question and then the answer you get allows you to ask the next question and the next question and the next question. Ultimately, the planned incinerator is within the legal framework. The question is whether the planners are willing to go against the legal framework and with the public. It isn't my decision.
No,
I don't get a vote on this. This will go to council. If council voted for it, it will go ahead. If the council vote against it, I suspect it will go ahead anyway, because the way the system works is that any developer will have the right to go to appeal, and the appeal people will look strategically.
Right.
It's tricky in Dorset because we've just had the Portland incinerator approved. So again, if you look at what happened there, the local council refused it. It went to planning appeal. It then went to the minister and the minister approved it. Now, if that one gets built, then we don't need one in Camford. We've got more than enough. But if Camford gets approved, then maybe Portland doesn't get built. So it is it's a
complex.
bit of a dance at the moment, and all I can do is try to put out there the risks, that we should not be feeding the monster. We should not be creating 260,000 tonnes capacity if in Dorset we're only using 150,000 tonnes, because that means we've got to drive stuff in from other places. I don't have a problem with people in Dorset having their waste burned in Dorset. Why should people in Somerset take our waste? Like, that's not fair, is it? But what I don't want to see is people in Dorset having to pay the price environmentally from burning waste from Wiltshire, Hampshire, the Isle of Wight, Somerset. Build something that is the right size for us. And that way, if we reduce our waste, then we can reduce our emissions as well. We shouldn't be having to drive it in.
That's a really good explanation of that topic. It's been very complex.
I think pragmatic is important.
Yeah.
Unless we're all going to go and live in caves and not use stuff, we shouldn't expect someone else to deal with our rubbish. Right now, our rubbish is being driven to Somerset and then burned in Somerset. Or when that plant isn't working, it's being driven to Denmark and burned in Denmark. That's not right. We're all using the rubbish. It's either got to be buried or burned. I just don't want to see us taking responsibility for other places.
Absolutely. Are there any other big things or projects you're working on at the moment in Parliament?
So the assisted dying bill is something that's been probably the most controversial thing we've dealt with, and that's probably created more more email traffic for me than any other topic. I think it's a really important. It's what they call a vote of conscience, and these votes only come up once in a generation. Other than sending people to war, it's probably the biggest vote that we'll ever have. And it's a real privilege to be part of that. It's something I've cared a lot about for most of my adult life. Since I was with my mum as she died and couldn't understand why it wasn't allowed, that I've always taken an interest in it. It's really polarising, and it's been really humbling to get letters from people from both sides sharing their views, and for me to have to take that really difficult decision about which way we vote. So that vote is coming up in the next few weeks, but it will take years before that legislation comes in if it is approved. And it links really closely to the whole issue of hospices, which is another really key topic for me. So I'm a massive supporter of Julia's House. I'm doing a big fundraiser with the chief exec of Julia's House in
Amazing.
the summer. We're doing an alternative triathlon across my constituency. So everybody look out for the opportunity to sponsor us.
Great.
I shall be kayaking, running and cycling from one end of the constituency to the other.
Lovely.
With the chief exec. So we're trying to raise the profile of hospices, and I've spent a lot of time with the other adult hospices again, because we really shouldn't be relying on charity at the end of our life. We don't rely on charity at the beginning of our life. So the NHS should be there for us at the end of our lives as well.
That's a great response. And the last question that we ask all of our guests, what does Dorset mean to you?
Everything. We moved to Dorset. We got married, and I got back to work the day after my honeymoon to be told that I'd been promoted from the Isle of Wight, where we were living, to run the Bournemouth and Poole area for the company I work for. So we settled in Broadstone. We've brought up all 4 of our children there. My mum moved down here as soon as the first grandchild was born. Then my dad moved down. You know, we've had a business here. It's home. I can't imagine living anywhere else. And I've almost forgotten what it was like to live anywhere else. So Dorset is just the most wonderful, magical place. And I'm looking forward probably in September or October to launching a Dorset Day in Parliament, so that everybody in Parliament can see all the great food, drink and activities you can do in Dorset.
Amazing. Thank you very much for coming in today, Vikki. It was lovely speaking to you.
You're welcome.